2011, and my name is Bonnie Dat, and I'm in New York City interviewing Patricia Fields at her home for the Archive of American Television.
Speed.
Count. We'd like to take about 10 minutes to get some information about your early years and influences. What was your name at birth?
Patricia Haig.
And where were you born?
I was born in Manhattan.
Where did you grow up here as well?
I did. I grew up here and Queens. When I was about 8 years old, my family bought a house out in Queens. So I spent my early years in Manhattan, as well as Queens, because my grandmother was there. And then we moved further out, and I spent my teenage years so on out in Whitestone, which is part of Queens on the North Shore, on the Long Island Sound. Very nice place.
Tell us about your parents.
My parents were, okay. My parents, my mother was born on an island, a Greek island. The name of the island is Lesbos. It's very close to Turkey. It's actually right south of the entrance to the Golden Horn. My dad was born in Turkey, in Istanbul. They met in New York. They didn't know each other there, even though they were from the same area. They met each other here at work.
What did they do?
My mom was working in a laundry, and my dad was a tailor. And they met, they married, they opened up their own business.
What was that?
A dry cleaning business. And if I would describe my mother, I mean, she was a total diamond in the rough. She made it, she really did, you know, she made the most out of her life. She was very, very intelligent. She enjoyed what she did. She enjoyed her life.
What were your parents' names?
My mother's name was Mary, and my father's name was Henry.
Field.
No, Henry Haig.
Haig.
Yeah.
And how did their background contribute to your developing a passion for clothing and fashion?
Okay, first of all, I need to qualify. My dad died when I was about 7. He was ill, and he passed away. So, while I have a strong memory of him, my big influences definitely came from my mother, since she was alive. And I would say that because my parents were in the dry cleaning business, and because their business was close to our home and my school in Manhattan, that my daily routine would be get up in the morning, go to their store, because they would go there early and open their shop. Then I would walk over, it was 2 blocks, I'd go there, have a coffee and a roll, and then go to school. This was my regular routine, so I was in that business all the time. And what I learned from that business, from my mother, I learned fabrics, because she would always tell me, this is silk and this is worsted, because she was working on them, cleaning them, and telling me what she was doing. So, you know, I kind of learned that about clothing and saw a lot of clothing. She had a wealthy clientele, because where we lived, it was kind of like on the border. It was on the east side, but, you know, we were like on 3rd Avenue. But once you get a little west into Park and Madison, it becomes another economic racket. So she did like very fine work. So her customers tended to be from, you know, wealthy people. So there were always silks and all kinds of clothes. And, you know, she was enjoying what she was doing, and she was sharing it with me, you know, telling me that was our conversation. So I found from very early that I did have that advantage about not fashion, maybe, but fabric. Fashion, yes, because I saw all kinds of clothes, but I would say that I understood fabric very more than anybody that I would say be on my level.
And what traits?
And that helps.
What traits do you think you inherited from your mother?
Well, there was another side as well that I inherited from my mother, and that is I inherited her business sensibility. She, made a business from nothing. And I grew up we weren't super wealthy, but we were comfortable from my mom's work. She expanded her business later on, and, I think that's something that I really inherited from my mother. That personality.
You have a different last name than your parents. How did you get that?
When my father died, my mom remarried, and her husband, Lewis Field, adopted my sister and I. We were kids, and so our names were changed to his. That's why I have a different name.
And how old were you?
I was about 9.
You were surrounded by all this clothing, and were you interested in fashion growing up? Did you pay attention to it in TV or film?
When I was growing up, and my mom was working every day, my grandmother and her younger sisters brought me up as a baby. And so as I grew into a little kid, they were like my team of mothers, but they were these young teenagers, number one, I don't know, 18, 19, something like that. And they were young women, and they would go out. They would go to Times Square, to the Roxy, to hear Frank Sinatra or Billy Eckstine. And they would be dragging me along because they were taking care of me. So I think I learned that fashion-y side, my first consciousness of glamour and, looking gorgeous, were from my aunts. Because they shopped and dressed and had their hair done, and they were like my big sisters in a way. So that's where I think that was my first understanding of that looks pretty.
So they were sort of a fashion education early on for you.
They were my aunts, my mother's younger sisters.
Tell about the rest of your education for high school, and did you go on past high school?
Well, before my formal education, there was a very, very important aspect of my education was my grandmother, who was a very intelligent woman. My mother and my grandmother, they shared a lot in common, even though not everything. My grandma was educated, intelligent, and knowledgeable and opinionated, kind of matriarchal, and I was like her jewel, and she just fed me with everything positive. So I learned a lot from her about life, history, culture. She played a very important role. You asked me about my dog's name. Her name is Sultana. My grandmother's name was Sultana. I always have a Sultana in my life. I've had a bird named Sultana. I need to have my grandmother's name around me at all times because she was that important to me. And so that's, I guess, my family was the basis of who I am. I believe in fate that way. It just depends on what cabbage patch you pop up in. And I was very fortunate to have such a great family. It's, I would say, if not totally, majorly responsible for anything I do in my life, the person that I am.
And then for your schooling?
So I was educated in New York City in the public school system. I went to school in Manhattan, and then out in Queens I went to Flushing High School. And then I went to college and got a degree from NYU in liberal arts. I studied history, politics, languages, philosophy. I didn't study anything about fashion or anything or any kind of trade thing. I'm very glad that it worked out that way because I'm a big believer in that. I feel that a classic education is what is like getting your brain to function. I believe that a technical education, while you can learn many things in different technical education courses, I think you can also learn that in the trade. But before, or you could go and get a technical after liberal arts, because I think liberal arts is what makes you educated and not narrow. So that's my education. I got out of college and I was like, well, I couldn't really think of anything that I wanted to have a career in of my studies. For me, my studies were, as I say, to enrich my brain. And I knew what I understood. I knew I understood business, because also as a teenager I would always go in my mother's business when her people, she had several stores, and in the summertime when they would go on vacation I would sub in for them, and so I was very involved. I knew how to do inventories when I was 13. You know, it was like I lived in my mother's world. And so I saw and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I saw an ad for a college level, like management trainee in a department store. It was like manage a department. I could do that. I mean, really, I wanted to say, when I was a kid at my home, we had a house that was on a road, on a road. And there was a breezeway and garage in the back facing the road. I used to set up little stores there and sell things. I was like, okay, I was selling on the streets. Maybe it wasn't the streets of Manhattan at that point, but I was always making my little, like, shops and so on.
What would you sell?
Whatever I had around there, I don't even remember. But I just remember we would, like, when I say we, I would grab my sister who was younger than me, but I would, like, so when I got so I saw this ad in the paper, and I said, well, I could do that. And I took this job, and I did very well, because I knew I could do this work. I felt the fashion. By that point, I knew that fashion was easy for me. And I understood business and how to deal with people and customers and so on. So I was very, successful at this first job that I had. And I was noticed because my sales were just all of a sudden, going up when before they had been flat for however long. Anyway, make a long story short, in the period of 3 years, I worked for 2 companies.
Which ones?
The first one was Alexander's, which is was a New York discount department store. And the second job was for a company called Petrie Stores, which is was a big nationwide chain. And in those jobs, I learned the retail fashion business. I didn't know that before. I knew business, I knew fashion, but the retail fashion business is what I learned. And then after 3 years, by then I was a buyer for this second company that I worked for. And after that point is when I was ready to have my own store. So along with a partner who was a very close friend of mine and had resources.
And who was that?
And with my resources, we combined them. And we opened up the first store. Her name is Joanne Salvucci. And that's the beginning. It was the store. It was a store that we put together with, our small amount of resources, and built the business. I mean, the first year, I was also working for a colleague and friend of mine who was a manufacturer, so I was working a few days a week to make some money to live. I was designing, he had a blouse collection, mainly separates. And after a year or so, the business was able to, turn over a little salary and whatever. And
what was the store called?
It was Patricia Field.
And could you describe what kind of clothing you were selling there, or what kind of products?
The clothing that we sold there was up to the store was right on NYU's campus. I knew the campus because I went there, so I knew my way around there. I knew the traffic patterns and so on. So I had a young female customer. I sold up-to-the-minute clothes for young people. At that time, it was bell-bottoms, skinny sweaters. It was sort of it was like towards the end of mod and towards the beginning of maybe hippie. So when I opened up my business in '66, it was more mod. It was like pants and tops and separates and casual clothes up to the minute, young, cute.
Is that how you were dressing then? Were you dressing in the style of clothing that you were selling?
Yeah.
That was your style as well?
Because I had my inspiration from a store in Flushing when I was in high school that I used to shop in a lot.
Do you remember the name of that?
It was called Ronnie's. And they were like very on-trend store. It was, women, it was for young women. Women wanted to wear pants that were like men's pants. And there were a couple of manufacturers at that time that was their specialty. And this store impressed me, and it was an inspiration for me when I opened up my store.
Through, say, the 1960s to the 1980s, how did the store style evolve, and as well as your own personal style?
Well, between 1966 and the 80s, that's a long time, and many, many things occurred. Developmentally, stylistically, financially. Okay, how could I give it a complete, an easy summary? I moved from my original shop on the campus. After being there for 5 years, I rented a much larger store also from NYU. NYU owned all this property on 8th Street. And so that was my 8th Street store, the famous 8th Street store, which I was actually there for 30 years, long time. And that store was at least 5 times the size of my original little store. So it was a bit scary, but it was, at that point I was like, I said to my partner, how are we ever going to fill this store with clothes? It's so big. We were in this little store. But anyway, it all worked out. Let's see. And at that same time, I don't remember if it's before or after, because she was from Philadelphia, we had an opportunity to open up a shop in Philadelphia, so we had 2 shops. We had one in the Village and one in Philadelphia, and then we opened up another one, and then I was like, okay, this is not working. All I do is run around like a crazy woman, and I'm not really making that much more money. So I let that go and back to my roots, New York. And so that was, let's say, early 70s, maybe 73, 74. By 1978, 79, I was in business now about 10 years. I feel that my store had attained a signature. That people, when they said the name, there was an image. I had, press started becoming interested in what we're doing. And we had gone through a couple of different phases. And by that time, I started making things for my store because I couldn't find what I was feeling I wanted. And so I started making some things. Not a huge manufacturing situation, but, just making little things here and there for my store.
So you would design things and then have...
And find small little factories. Like at that time, right near my original store, there was a men's factory of suits and pants and stuff. And I went there and I had them make me some vests, for example. Just a small company in New York, which they don't exist anymore.
Would you draw what you wanted or just describe it?
Yeah, I don't draw. What I would do was either describe it or I would give a sample and say this way, but 2 buttons instead of 3 buttons or whatever. I would try to find a sample to start off with and go that way.
And did you sew as well, or?
No, I never sewed. I didn't take that from my father. I remember as a kid when I was in, 6th grade, 7th grade, and they had these like home ec and sewing things. I'd take the pattern and give it to my father, not my father, who the hell? I don't know, whoever was over there at the time, because my dad was dead by then. I'd farm it out to somebody in my mother's business to make me the skirt or something. I had no interest in sewing.
So with the store, how influential would you say that you and the store were becoming at that time within New York, the New York fashion scene and the fashion industry?
Well, at that time in the from 1980, wait a minute, at that time, what time? Are we still in the 70s?
We can, that general period.
In that time, in the early 80s, my store and my name meant something to people. Fashion people. International fashion people. Dolce & Gabbana, whoever, they would come to my store always checking out what's going on. 80s. I was making clothes, for my store. I went through these different phases of as well as, having like up to the minute whatever was going on. So it had an identity in the fashion industry in New York and in the international fashion industry. In 85, I think it was, a friend of mine, Candy Price, was consulting on a movie directed by Karen Arthur. Candy Pratt's is a famous window designer. She and Barb Curry dominated the department store windows and the whole style of department store windows in the late 70s and 80s. And she was consulting on this movie, and the main character, who was Diane Lane, who was a young kid at the time, worked in a department store, and she was this window designer. So Candy was designing the windows, and Karen Arthur, the director, asked Candy if she could recommend somebody to do the clothes, because she wanted this girl to be sort of a fashionista as opposed to what she understood as, let's say, costume design, classic costume design from Hollywood. So Candy recommended me. I had never done anything like this before. I met Karen. We had a nice talk. She liked me. She hired me. So that was my first experience in film.
And what film was that?
The film is called Lady Beware.
So at this point...
It was a psychodrama. And I tell you, it was many things to me, that experience. First of all, at certain points it was really scary, because I would reach like a point where, I didn't know what to do. For example. So there were some scary moments, but at the same time, there was a lot of positive support from Karen, because she knew that I didn't, have the experience, but she wanted the creativity. So she was very supportive of me to help me get through the technical side of it. I didn't know how to break a script down. I had no idea. But she supported me. She got me somebody strong to help me in the technical side. And, it was good. I got through it. In the end, I was really happy. I was like, it opened up a whole new world to me. I had already been in business for 20 years now. And now there was this new road to take.
Which you'd never considered before?
No, I never considered it. I had my business. But I must say, at the same time, around that time, a little bit before actually, I was going through a little bit of a crisis, because I was like, okay, I've done this now for whatever, going on 20 years. What else is there? Is this what I'm going to do to the rest of the day that I'm, my life? And I was going through a little bit of a, wanting to do something, but so when this came along, it was perfect. It's, it fed that hunger. And I enjoyed it, and not only for me, it was a great, because it was easy. I could dress people. That's what I did all the time in my shop. My customers would come in, I would style these people, put them together, and that was my role. So for this movie, I was dressing, a handful of actors, and then making the money, and it was far more than I was used to. I was making a living. I was fine. But then all of a sudden, to do some kind of work like this and make $2,500 a week, at that time was oh my God, this is great. So I did enjoy it, and I did a good job because I did enjoy it. And the producer liked the clothes and offered me another job in LA. So from the first job, very soon after, I was in LA doing another movie.
And what was that?
It was called He's My Girl. It was a takeoff on the 7-Year Itch, kind of. And so I was out there in LA for about 8 weeks or whatever it took to do this. And I met a producer because, let me see. I met a producer, through one of my staff. She wanted to introduce me to this producer that she knew, because for some reason she thought he would like me or whatever. I met this producer, and I was, and I brought some photos of some some outfits that I was putting together for the movie that I was working on. As it worked out, Jennifer Tilly was in that movie, and as it worked out, this producer was just getting ready to sign Jennifer Tilly for some other movie, and he saw these photos of Jennifer Tilly in the clothes that I put on her, and he was like, great, we're getting Jennifer Tilly, we're going to do this movie, I want you to do the clothes. Never worked out, but he became a producer for Crime Story, and that show was going through a little bit of a transition, and I get a call from out of the blue, I want you to come out to Las Vegas and do this TV show that I'm producing, Crime Story. Out to Las Vegas. So I'm just saying it, I enjoyed what I was doing. I was appreciative of this kind of work.
What did you enjoy about it?
I enjoyed, number one, the change. Of course, I still had my store, but I enjoyed the change of expression of my creativity or my work or whatever. That I enjoyed. Number two, I enjoyed the money. That was money. That was money for me. In the years that have passed, the costume designers have not made any advances. In 1980, whatever. 5, 6, I made $2,500 a week, and today in 2011, that is the salary for costume designers. So it's not saying something very good.
So when you were...
But I enjoyed that money. I appreciated that I was getting that kind of money for my work, and I was appreciative. You know, I was never jaded because it was like, oh my God, this is really fantastic. And I also enjoyed that creative process of doing it. Meeting many interesting people, actors, whoever, directors. I worked with Michael Mann. I worked with really, you know, it was a whole new world for me within this, like, clothing arena. So it was totally positive.
When you worked on the NBC show Crime Story, what do you remember about your first experiences of being on a TV set and working in a TV production?
Well, it wasn't any different than a film production. It's a TV series, it's film, or, you know. I didn't find any difference on the set of a film or a TV. It was the same for me. But that show for me, it was, I remember it as like a fun fantasy. Because that show consisted of 5 FBI guys and 5 mafia guys doing the French chase in Las Vegas. While the mafias were building up Las Vegas, the FBI's were like chasing after them. And this was a Michael Mann project, half of that crew, half of those actors, they were originally cops and crooks. And there they were in Las Vegas in 1987, and this was like the first big production that had come to Las Vegas. And they were like the Rat Pack, because Crime Story, while we did it in the end of the 80s, it took place in the early 60s on that like Rat Pack time. So they were the new Rat Pack, and they were just having so much fun. They were a couple of ex-cops, a couple of ex-gangsters, and then some actors. So it was, for me, just such a fun experience because of these things. And I had a very, very good producer who quickly got me a huge warehouse so I could, because this was a show that, it was a period piece, but it was like you go into a casino, it's 100 extras all in period. So I It was just great. The whole everybody we were kind of on vacation. We were working, but we were having so much fun with it. It was fun.
So, what were some of the inspirations you used to dress people from the 1960s?
Well, I used the 60s clothing as inspiration to dress people for the 60s, but I didn't do it exactly, period. I did it period with a punch. So I mixed it.
With more contemporary?
No, I mixed it with pieces that you could buy, but the way I combined them or whatever they were still sold the 60s, but it just had some little vibration to it that wasn't really in the 60s.
What other responsibilities did you have? You said you had the extras and the cast. Were there any other responsibilities that you had in your job on the show?
My responsibilities included everything that had to do with the wardrobe.
And you worked with Michael Mann on some of his other projects. What's he like to work with?
Michael, okay, I respect Michael. Michael is a real professional. He's serious about what he does. And I really respect that. When I worked for Michael, I was very early in my career, and he was a total pro, so I was a little intimidated by him, but I think he appreciated my work, and that, made things better for me. Because, I was really new at the game. That was my third job. And he was, a powerhouse. And, but I respected him because he had an artistic side to him. He saw things and he could describe them. And he was also a great businessman. So, I identified with him that way, since I'm similar.
So after that, could you tell us about Mother Goose Rock and Rhyme?
Yeah, that was, when I went to LA to do Michael's, it was a pilot that didn't take off, but later became a very successful movie for him. What was it called? The pilot was LA Takedown, but the movie was, I don't remember the name, but it was about a bank robbery, and it turned into this big feature film. I went there to do that pilot for Michael, and while I was there, I got this job for Rock and Rhyme. The director was someone who I knew socially.
And who was that?
And Jeff Stein. And he was close colleagues with Shelley Duvall, who was the producer of this thing for Disney. So Jeff introduced me to Shelley, and they hired me to do the Rock and Rhyme.
Can you tell us what about the show? It was about nursery sort of.
It was a comical musical takeoff on Mother Goose, is what it was.
And you had a lot of stars in the cast.
Yeah.
Ian Stapleton, Woody Harrelson, Art Garfunkel, Cyndi Lauper.
Huge cast of cameos.
How did that impact your work, working with so many name celebrities, or did?
No, it was great. It was fun. It was different. I was learning every time. This was a movie where Mother Goose got lost in Rhymeland, and Bo Peep sets out to find her, and in her search for Mother Goose comes across all these Mother Goose characters, Rhymeland characters. Three Blind Mice, Old King Cole, Old Lady That Lived in the Shoe, I don't know, the whole array of them. Itsy Bitsy Spider, Three Men in a Tub. And they were, these were cameos, and every day it would be a new cameo player. Little Richard, Woody Harrelson, Debbie Harry, Cyndi Lauper. It was insane. Ben Vereen. It was great. Every day, it's like I was there with my friend Molly, my friend and colleague, and we were like, we went to Little Richard played Old King Cole. And Little Richard was living in the Sunset, that hotel on Sunset, I don't know, Plaza, right on Sunset. Anyway, and he was living there, so we went to his hotel room where he lived. And in his room, along the whole sides of the wall, the corner beneath the floor, that's where all his shoes were. You know, it was so, I was like, oh my God, because I was a fan of Little Richard anyway, so that was really a thrill for me. He had such style. He came for his one day, you know, performance. He came with his entourage in his Cadillac, parked his Cadillac outside his trailer, sat with his friends. He didn't disappoint me one little bit.
When you would create these fairy tale costumes for the different characters, did you take into consideration the actors or performers who were doing it? Like,
absolutely.
So can you give me an example of like how that would?
I mean, this was a cool show for me to do. I really was inspired to do it because it was costume. And I guess what I did is I made that combination again, but from the other direction. It's costume, and I made the direction from like the fashion. So it was fashion costume fashion. For example, Ben Vereen was Itsy Bitsy Spider. And I knew of this downhill racing company called Spider. And their suit, it was a body suit, long sleeve, with this big spider logo. And their colors, for example, they would have a black suit and it would be a day-glow green spider logo on this thing. So I was like, I called Spider. I said, send me one of those because, I mean, for me, it wasn't about making the clothes. It was about creating the looks with different resources of clothes. He loved it because he could move in it. He was the spider dancing. It looked great. And it was easy because I had the solution, because you need to have your solutions. When there's a problem, there's a solution, so you just find it.
So you had, in this job, you really had to know about all kinds of different elements of the industry, like these spider costumes. Did you do specific research, or were these
No, well, I knew it because I came from 20 years of fashion business, so I knew all this. In the 80s, I had body glove clothes, you know, I knew all this. But that job, that was a real fun, that was for me like a costume design job. And I won the Emmy for that. And it, you know, it didn't even know that I was like, okay, I'm going to win an Emmy, or I'm nominated for an Emmy. The crazy thing about that was I went there with my friend to LA for the Emmys, and we get in the car, and it's somewhere in Pasadena, and I really didn't know too much about that side of LA. And we got lost, and we couldn't find it. And then when we finally found it and we went inside, well, Costume Designing Award was the first one that they gave. We missed it.
Oh.
And so I go in there, and it's, you know, table, banquet, excuse me. And so I'm talking to the lady sitting at the table where it's my table, and I say, oh, the costume design was done already. I said, oh, really? Who won? Patricia Field. Like, you know, it was horrible. I got lost. I was going crazy. I couldn't find this place. But, I mean, I think I was very happy to get that Emmy. Actually, it was my most happy Emmy. Because I did a very, very good job with very limited funds. And in a chaotic situation, which I stayed very clear in. And I thought, you know, it came out really good. I was happy with it. And, you know, it was, and not that I love Bob Mackie, he's a friend of mine, but I beat Bob Mackie and I was a little nobody. And I never thought I was going to get this Emmy, but of course I got it, but of course I was late for it. But that is my favorite Emmy because I think it's one of the most intelligent costuming projects that I've done. The way I pulled this Mother Goose fantasy together with, with familiar images that people, adults, could get into because it's Mother Goose, and it's, like, I think when I was nominated for the Oscar for Devil Wears Prada, just talking about that, and I lost to Melina Canonero, but I believed she definitely deserved it. There were a couple of really good competitors because she did that too. She was able to take Marie Antoinette and put Marie Antoinette into a zone, into a backdrop where today's people could relate to Marie Antoinette. And I think she deserved that Oscar. I mean, she did a beautiful job. I did that same job. I did that same thing in the Mother Goose. You know what I mean? I didn't go to a book and look up old costumes and reproduce old little costumes from Mother Goose. I went to the modern places and found how I related, like Three Men in a Tub. It was, what's that group called?
ZZ Tops?
ZZ Top. When I met them, because that's what I would do, I would meet them first, talk to them, and then go figure out the costume or whatever. And they impacted me so much because these three like burly guys with beards in a tub. So I thought of those Hasidic, and that Hasidic hat and coat. The Hasidic hat, which has a wide brim and a small crown, and it's made of beaver, with that long black coat. Those guys in those beards, it's like rabbinical, but they're not. They're three men in a tub, but they're ZZ Top. So it was kind of playing around with those cultural images and, information to bring something that's here and bring it together. I mean, fairy tales for adults.
Great. So around this period, you met Sarah Jessica Parker on the set of Miami Rhapsody.
I met Sarah Jessica Parker in I think it might have been '94, because after that time that I was in LA, I came back to New York. It was 1990, or at the end of '89, and because of Crime Story, I knew a lot of the Michael Mann people in Miami, and I had just bought an apartment in Miami. And then I started to work in Miami. And actually, I did quite a bit of work in Miami between 90 and 96. And one of those was Miami Rhapsody. And I met Sarah Jessica Parker on that. Also, David Frankel, who wrote and directed it, who was the director of Devil Wears Prada. I worked with David a lot in Miami. He's from Miami. So we go back a long time. And I met Sarah Jessica from that Miami Rhapsody. I think it was, I don't remember, 95 or something like that.
Well, what was your first impression of her?
My first impression was that, she was very savvy, alert, interested, professional, energetic.
Did she contribute any ideas to her costumes at that point?
Totally savvy, yeah. She had her opinions and her ideas. She knew what was going on. We completely agreed. We had to convince David. you know, it was the time of like skinny little short T-shirts. And David is like, what's with the belly showing all the time? I'm like, David, this is, why don't, you know, he was coming from something more of a relaxed, but, you know, Sarah Jessica is very, very convincing. So between the two of us, we were able to convince him to let us do it.
So during this period, you kept your store open, which it still is. Why was it important for you to keep the store going while you were getting so involved in television?
The store was mine. I had a new career, but I'm not dumping my old one just because I have a new one. You know, that's a mistake. There was, you know, it took a while to transition because I would leave my shop and disappear for a month or two or whatever, and I would leave my people there to run it. It took several years to smooth that out. I remember once in '90 when I came back from California. I think it was California, yeah. I swear to God, I thought I was bankrupt. I looked around and I could see the walls. There was very little inventory, and then, you know, I went through the papers and sorted out this big mess of papers, and I added up my bills, and I owed $300,000, and I counted my inventory, and I had about $175,000. I'm like, I'm gone. But, you know, I fixed it, and I'm just saying, it wasn't a simple transition. It took a few years to get that smooth. It took several years to get that smooth. Because I would disappear from my business. Call, hi, how's it going? Fine.
Right, and you
in the meantime, they turn off the electricity because nobody paid the electric bills. Unbelievable.
And you had been the buyer before, and probably, did you still have time to do that?
God. That was also transition when I was still buying, but I had, you know, assistant.
So you started working, or you met your business partner, Rebecca Weinberg, in the 1990s. How did
Rebecca Weinberg was never my business partner.
Oh, okay.
Rebecca Weinberg was my girlfriend who I got into styling as a career. She was a dancer. I met her. She met me. We became a couple. I was doing this movie thing. She had great style. She was a natural for this as far as her talent. And so she became my assistant, and that's how that happened. But we never really had a business together. We both worked for a movie company.
So going into Sex and the City, how were you first approached about working as a costume designer for Sex and the City?
I was approached by Barry Johnson. Called me up. Barry Johnson's a producer, a line producer. He was now a big guy in ABC, and he was college friends with David Frankel. So we had worked in Miami together. He did line producing for David. We worked on about 3-4 shows together in Miami. And I got a call from him. I mean, he was the line producer on Miami Rhapsody, so he knew Sarah Jessica, you know, was... And he called me, and he told me that, you know, they did this Sex and the City pilot, and that they weren't happy with the look of it, or I don't know. And that Sarah Jessica and he had suggested to Darren Star to talk to me that I should do this job.
So they were going to redo the pilot?
No, they never redid it. They did some parts of it. They made a couple of scenes. They didn't do the whole entire pilot. They did a couple of things. So anyway, Sarah Jessica and Barry introduced me to Darren, and they convinced Darren, who didn't know me, to hire me for this job. So that's what happened.
Were you at all familiar with Candace Bushnell's essays and her writings that the show was based on?
At the time, no. Of course, once I understood that I was going to have this job, I went and found out what it was about. I never really I never read her articles in the Observer or...
What did you think when you first read the script?
You know what? When I first read the script, I thought, are people really going to watch this show? Because I'm from another world. I don't watch this kind of TV. It's that, because when I watch TV, I want to watch something that I'm going to learn. I'll watch science, I'll watch astronomy, I'll watch history, or, current events, or a really good movie. But I don't watch all the series. Through the years, I've never watched them. When people talk about, for example, Gilligan's Island, or whatever, I never watched these things, even from then. I just never did. So I'm not a good judge of that, because it's not my taste level. And I learned that along the way. Because when I first read the Sex and the City script, I said to Rebecca, as we had started working together, is anybody really going to watch this show? I was in it for my work and to make it look beautiful. Passing, my opinions on the content, I'm not qualified for that. I really am not. I don't spend my time in that world. So I would be the last person to ask if this is going to be a hit show or not.
In the pilot, what were the original costumes like before you came in, what you saw of them?
I think the problem with the costumes of the original pilot was, number one, they did not really define the characters. And number two, many of them did not fit very well on the actors, which is, to me, it's a gross infraction. I mean, clothing has to fit that's being photographed. But I don't know. I didn't get into it too much, to tell you the truth. I mean, I knew I was replacing somebody. I didn't know the person. I had empathy for her. She had a job. I just did my job. But the first thing that I did that I needed to do was I said to Darren, just tell me these 4 characters. Just give me your description of these characters. I need to know, what they are. And he is articulate, intelligent, direct. He told me each character that he saw. Actually, Carrie was the most vague. She was like an eclectic New York City girl. Okay. But anyway, at least I got a foundation from him, which I needed. Because I needed a hook. I needed something to start off from.
And did you immediately have an idea where you wanted to go with them, or was it a longer process?
It varied with each character. But it was, I tell you, when Darren gave me his description, it really clicked in. It gave me a good start. And then along the way, I developed it. But initially, his words were very important to me. And if Carrie was a bit more vague, Sarah Jessica filled in the vacuum of the vagueness of the Carrie character, because she was excited and she had her ideas and we knew each other and we got right to work on it.
Did the other actresses have input as well?
Everybody had input. This is a process of collaboration. I mean, my job as a costume designer is to support the actor. That's my main job, I see. Because that actor is up there in front of that camera, not me. If the clothes don't feel right, if they don't feel right in the clothes, I'm not doing my job. And it prevents them from doing their job if they're thinking, oh, this waist it's too tight, or I don't look good, or I don't feel right. It's funny because I'm very often asked, it's a favorite dumb question that I'm asked all the time. Was there any time that an actor refused, or one of the 4 girls refused to wear what you gave them? And I was like, I do the first edit. If there's 5 costumes in an episode, well, the actor is going to have a choice of at least 20 per end costume.
So they have choices.
Of course. I'm the first editor. I go, this'll work, this'll work, this'll work, this'll work. Then they're hanging on a rack at the fitting, and the actor, and we go through it and we see what they like. It's them in front of the camera, not me. So,
let's cut here. We're going to change tape.